My mom collapsed after working 36 hours straight because her boss at the medical supply factory kept her green card in his office safe and threatened to call ICE if she ever said no to extra shifts. What would you do if someone threatened your mother? What would you do if someone threatened the only person who ever protected you? My mother came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and worked her fingers to the bone so I could have everything. I haven't met her expectations yet because I'm not literally the president, but I have a decent job stocking shelves at Target while I get through college. And then my salary combined with what my mom makes at the medical supply factory means we can afford a small apartment together without too much stress. But last Tuesday when I got home from my shift, I found mom passed out on the couch still wearing her factory uniform with her work boots still on her feet. Her hands were so swollen they looked like latex gloves filled with water, and she had these dark circles under her eyes that made her look 20 years older. When I tried to wake her up, she jerked awake in total panic and started apologizing in broken English saying, sorry, I go back 1 hour, which made no sense because my mom doesn't speak English well and we never use it at home. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, and I didn't understand why because the bills were paid for that month and we were doing okay. I asked her if she needed money, if she needed me to pick up extra shifts, but she just shook her head and told me it was nothing. Her phone was buzzing nonstop with messages from someone saved as Mr. Phillips' boss, and when I grabbed it to turn it off, I saw texts saying things like back in 1 hour and don't make me call immigration, which made no sense because my mother has had her green card for 15 years. I scrolled through more messages and found photos of her actual green card that this Phillips guy had apparently taken and kept sending back to her with threats about calling ICE if she didn't come back for another shift. When I switched to Spanish and told her she was home and safe, she broke down crying and explained he's been making her work 16-hour shifts back to back, and if she says no, he tells her that her documents are fake and she'll be deported tomorrow. The thing about my mother is she believes anyone with authority because where she comes from, you don't question people in charge unless you want to disappear. She's been living in fear for 3 months thinking this man actually has the power to destroy our entire life with one phone call. I noticed the pile of energy drink cans overflowing from our trash and a prescription bottle on the counter with someone else's name on it that turned out to be Adderall she'd been taking just to stay awake during these insane shifts. The next morning I called in sick to work and drove to the factory, which was this gray building surrounded by barbed wire that looked more like a prison than a workplace. The security guard wouldn't let me pass the front desk, so I waited in the parking lot until lunch break when workers started stumbling out into the daylight. They moved like those videos you see of people coming out of underground mines, holding on to each other and squinting at the sun, and almost all of them were clearly immigrants. I recognized a woman from my mother's church and asked her in Spanish what was really going on in there. She looked terrified and whispered that Phillips makes certain workers do doubles and triples by keeping their documents locked in his office safe and threatening to call immigration whenever anyone complains. She said he specifically targets people who don't speak English well, and my mother works more hours than anyone because she never fights back. Your mother worked 36 hours straight last weekend, and he made her stand the entire time, she said, before basically running away from me. I walked straight through those doors, and nobody stopped me because I guess I looked like I belonged there with my angry face and determined walk. Phillips was in this glass office overlooking the factory floor, counting a stack of cash at his desk like some cartoon villain. When I told him I was Elena's daughter, he actually smiled and said, the one who's going to college, your mom talks about you all the time, like we were having a friendly conversation. I asked him why my mother had been working 16-hour shifts, and he leaned back in his chair still grinning and said, your mother is very dedicated to her job, and we appreciate workers who understand the value of hard work around here. I told him I knew about the deportation threats, and that keeping someone's documents and threatening them with ICE was super illegal. His whole expression changed, and he stood up and got right in my face close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his breath. You know what's illegal is forging documents to enter this country, which is what I'll tell ICE your mother did if you don't get out of my office right now, he said, even though we both knew he was lying. I pulled out my phone to record him, but he grabbed it and threw it against the wall where it shattered into pieces. Tell your mother she better be here for her shift tonight or I'll have her on a plane back to Guatemala by morning, he said, even though my mother is from El Salvador, which showed he didn't even know basic facts about the people he was terrorizing. Through the glass, I could see dozens of workers bent over their stations moving like robots, and I recognized at least 5 more faces from our neighborhood, all looking exhausted and defeated. I knew exactly what I had to do to end this. I was going to destroy him completely. I ran to my car in the factory parking lot, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The metal scraped against the lock 3 times before I finally got it open. I sat there for a while, engine running, just watching the day shift workers stumble out at 6. Most of them were holding each other up just to walk, arms linked like they might collapse if they let go. Their uniforms were stained with whatever chemicals they'd been handling all day, and they moved with that slow, painful shuffle you see in people who've been on their feet way too long. I recognized at least 8 people from our neighborhood, the lady who runs the corner store, the man who fixes cars in his driveway, the couple from 2 buildings over who always smile at me in the hallway. None of them had ever mentioned working here, and now I understood why. Miriam Bansal from Mom's church walked past my car, her shoulders hunched forward like she was carrying something heavy. I rolled down the window and called out to her in Spanish. Miriam, please, can we talk for just a minute? She looked around nervously, her eyes darting between the factory entrance and the other workers streaming past. When I need to know what's really going on, I said. Please. She glanced back at the factory again. That's illegal, I said, but she was already backing away. Don't make this worse for your mother, she said, and then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of exhausted workers heading to their cars. I drove straight to CVS, my mind made up. The store was mostly empty except for a teenager at the register who didn't even look up from his phone when I walked in. I grabbed a burner phone from the electronics aisle, one of those prepaid ones that doesn't need a contract, and a small voice recorder that was on sale. The kid rang me up without making eye contact, which was perfect since I didn't need anyone remembering me buying this stuff. I paid cash, stuffed everything in my purse, and headed home. When I got there, Mom was already getting ready for work. She was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to cover the dark circles under her eyes with makeup that wasn't quite the right shade. Mom, please don't go, I begged, standing in the doorway. We can figure something else out. She shook her head without looking at me. He already texted. If I don't show up tonight, he's calling ICE. She held up her phone to show me the message, and even though we both knew he was lying, she'd had her green card for 15 years, everything was legal. The fear in her eyes was real. I can't risk it, Mija. What if he knows someone? What if they believe him? While she was in the bathroom, I grabbed her work bag and quickly taped the voice recorder inside one of the inner pockets, making sure it was hidden but positioned where it would pick up sound. When she came out, I handed her the bag like nothing had happened. Just in case, I said, trying to sound casual. Keep your phone on silent, but leave it on. She nodded, too tired to question me. I watched her put on her work boots, the same ones I'd pulled off her swollen feet just days ago, and my chest felt tight with rage. Mom left at 9, and I followed her in my car to make sure she got there safe. After she went inside, I parked down the street where I could watch the factory entrance but wouldn't be too obvious. My stomach hurt thinking about her in there for another 16 hours, standing the entire time because Phillips didn't allow sitting except during the single 15-minute break he was legally required to give. I pulled out the burner phone and started Googling labor lawyers. Most offices were closed, but I kept calling until someone named Miranda Bell answered on the 7th try. Bell Law Office, this is Miranda. I need help, I said, and then the whole story came pouring out. Mom's exhaustion, Phillips keeping documents, the threats, everything. Miranda listened without interrupting. So you'll help us? I want to, but I need real proof. Not just your word or your mother's. I need documentation, recordings, and at least 3 workers willing to testify. Without that, it's just accusations against a man who probably has good lawyers. She gave me her direct number and told me to write down everything. Dates, times, exact words if I could remember them. Be careful, she added before hanging up. Men like Phillips don't like being challenged. I spent the rest of the night in that parking spot, making an anonymous email account on my phone, factorytruth2024@protonmail.com, and typing up flyers in Spanish. Why does Phillips keep physical documents in his office safe when everything's digital now? That detail makes me wonder if there's something specific about having the actual papers that gives him more control over these workers, the way he was counting cash at his desk. The flyer said workers could share their stories safely without giving names, that someone was collecting evidence to stop the abuse. I drove to the all-night FedEx and printed 50 copies, my hands still shaking as I fed bills into the machine. Mom came home at 7 in the morning, and the sound of her key in the lock woke me up from where I dozed off on the couch. She practically fell through the door, catching herself on the wall. Her face was gray with exhaustion, and she was crying from pain as she collapsed onto the couch. My hands, she whispered, holding them up. They were so swollen she couldn't bend her fingers, and when I tried to help her take off her boots, she sobbed. I had to cut the laces because her feet had swollen too much to pull them off normally. After anyone who complains gets deported in 24 hours, his voice said through the static. You see Elena over there? She's my best worker because she never causes trouble. Be like Elena if you want to keep your job. There was more. Hours of factory noise, machines running, occasional shouting in English and Spanish. At one point I heard Mom's voice saying, "Yes sir, Mr. Phillips," in her broken English, and it made me want to throw up. I skipped my classes. While I was there, I walked around the building taking photos with the burner phone. The windows on the east side were broken and covered with plastic sheets. The emergency exit door was chained shut from the outside. There were chemical drums leaking something green onto the concrete, and the smell made my eyes water from 20 feet away. The safety violations alone could shut this place down, but I wanted Phillips to pay for everything he'd done to these people. By afternoon, 3 workers had sent anonymous emails to the account I'd created. The first one was in broken English. He take my passport 2 years ago. Say he keep it safe but charge me rent for safekeeping. I cannot leave without passport. Another wrote in Spanish about wage theft and forced overtime without pay. She said Phillips had stolen about $8,000 from her over 3 years, and she'd kept all her pay stubs as proof. The third email made my blood boil. Mr. Phillips owns the house I rent. If I complain about factory, he evict my whole family. We are trapped. I looked up property records online, and sure enough, Phillips owned 12 rental houses in our neighborhood, all in the blocks around the factory. Every single one was rented to factory workers. He had them trapped at work and at home, controlling every aspect of their lives. Another email came in while I was searching. This woman explained that Phillips took cash from their paychecks for fake fees, uniform cleaning, equipment rental, even charging them for the drinking water. She'd done the math and figured out he was stealing about $300 per worker per month. That night, I went back to the factory during shift change when there was chaos, and Jorge Wilkerson, the security guard, couldn't watch everyone. The workers moved in a tired mass, heads down, and I slipped inside with the crowd, keeping my face turned away from the cameras. The factory floor was worse than I'd imagined. The temperature had to be over 90 degrees, and the air was thick with chemical fumes that made my throat burn immediately. Workers stood at long tables, their hands moving in repetitive motions, packaging medical supplies into boxes. No chairs anywhere, no fans, just rows and rows of people standing in place like robots. I ducked behind some equipment where I could see Phillips' office up on the second floor. The glass walls meant I could watch him clearly as he sat at his desk counting stacks of cash. He was putting money in envelopes with workers' names written on them, the money he was stealing from their paychecks, sorted and ready to pocket. I pulled out the burner phone and started recording, zooming in as much as the cheap camera would allow. I got about 30 seconds of footage before someone appeared beside me. "You need to get out now," Jorge whispered, not looking directly at me. "He's coming back down." I froze, thinking I was caught, but Jorge's next words surprised me. "Go out the back, through shipping. I'll delete the camera footage of you coming in." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He was younger than I'd thought, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes that reminded me of Mom's. "Why?" I whispered. "Just go," he said, already walking away. "He's coming." I slipped out through the shipping area, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. In my car, I immediately uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services: Google Drive, Dropbox, and iCloud. If something happened to the phone, the evidence would survive. Miranda texted while I was uploading. "Anonymous emails aren't enough. I need actual witnesses willing to testify, even if we protect their identities. Without that, we can't do anything official." I kept refreshing my phone, hoping for just one worker to break the silence and agree to testify. Nothing. The fear was winning. "Oh my God," I whispered, grabbing the remote to turn up the volume. There was Phillips on hidden camera, his voice crystal clear. "Anyone who complains gets deported in 24 hours. The footage was grainy, but you could see him clearly, pointing at workers while making threats. They'd blurred the workers' faces, but I recognized the factory floor immediately. "A brave family member of one of the workers provided this evidence," Kayla said, looking straight into the camera. She didn't use my name, but hearing myself called brave made my hands shake. "What you're seeing is systematic exploitation of immigrant workers through threats, wage theft, and document confiscation." Mom grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. "Mija, what did you do?" "What I had to," I said, squeezing back. The segment went on for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of Phillips counting stolen money, of safety violations, of testimony from workers with their voices disguised. Kayla had taken everything I'd given her and turned it into something undeniable. My phone started buzzing immediately. Miranda texted, "Watching now. This changes everything." The next morning was chaos. I drove Mom to the factory because she insisted on going, not to work, but to see. When we pulled into the parking lot, it was already full of white vans with government plates. The Department of Labor had arrived. Workers stood in clusters in the parking lot, some crying, others just staring in disbelief as officials in suits carried boxes out of the building. Phillips was there too, red-faced and screaming at someone on his phone while two officers stood nearby. "They're shutting it down," someone said in Spanish. "Temporarily, but they're shutting it down." I watched Phillips try to approach a group of workers, probably to threaten them one last time, but an official stepped between them. "Sir, you need to stay back. These workers are under federal protection while this investigation proceeds." Miriam appeared beside us, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it's really happening." She hugged Mom. The entire parking lot went silent. We watched them read him his rights, watched them put the handcuffs on, watched them guide him into the back of a police car. Someone started clapping. I think it was Jorge. And then everyone was applauding and crying and hugging each other. His lawyer got him out on bail by that afternoon, but it didn't matter. His face was on every local news channel. The newspaper ran his mugshot on the front page with the headline, "Factory owner accused of modern slavery." Everyone knew what he'd done. $8,000, she read, staring at the check like it might disappear. "They're paying me back. $8,000 of stolen wages." She held that check against her chest and cried. Not sad tears this time, tears of validation, proof that she mattered, that what happened to her was wrong, that someone, "This is just the beginning," Miranda told us when we met at her office. "The criminal case is moving forward, and there's going to be a labor hearing where your mother and others can testify." "Will she have to face him?" I asked. "No, she can testify through a translator with a screen between them. We're going to make this as easy as possible for the workers." The hearing was scheduled for the meanwhile. The factory had to reopen. People needed their jobs. But everything was different now. The company brought in Louis Adamson as the new manager, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd run factories in 3 other states. He held a meeting in the parking lot on his first day. "I know you've been through hell," he said, surprising everyone by starting in Spanish. "I'm here to run this place right. Legal hours, overtime pay, breaks every 2 hours. Anyone who feels unsafe or mistreated can come to me directly, or use the anonymous complaint system we're setting up." Mom was offered her job back immediately. "Proper hours," Louis emphasized. 8-hour shifts, overtime only if you want it, and time and a half pay for anything over 40 hours. She thought about it for 3 days before deciding. "I want to look for something better," she told me. "I deserve something better." I was so proud of her. I started going to the church on Wednesday nights, setting up in the basement with Miranda to teach workers about their rights. The first week, only 5 people showed up. The second week, 12. By the third week, we had 30 people crammed into that basement, all taking notes while Miranda explained minimum wage laws and I translated. Miriam became my co-organizer. She'd transformed completely from the terrified woman who'd whispered to me in the parking lot. Now she stood at the front of the room, telling her story to help others find their courage. "They want us to be afraid," she said during one meeting. "But look what happens when just one person," she pointed at me, "decides not to be afraid." Phillips collecting stolen cash in labeled envelopes while being filmed through his glass office walls? That's some next-level villain confidence right there. Nothing says untouchable like sorting your crimes alphabetically in plain sight. Everything changes. Jorge had been promoted to head of security under Louis. He came to one of our meetings and stood at the back, his security uniform making some people nervous until he spoke. "I watched what Phillips did for 5 years," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I needed my job. I have 5 kids. I told myself I couldn't do anything, but I was a coward. I'm sorry. From now on, my office is open to anyone who needs help. And there's a complaint box that I personally check every day. Anonymous, no cameras watching it, I promise." 3. Her hands had healed completely by the day Phillips' criminal trial started. We all went to the courthouse. Not to testify, that would come later, but to watch. He sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, but he looked smaller somehow, deflated. His lawyer kept whispering in his ear while the prosecutor laid out the charges. The evidence was overwhelming. The hidden camera footage, Jorge's security tapes, financial records showing years of theft, testimony from 18 workers. Even his own bookkeeper had flipped and agreed to testify against him. After 3 days of watching his empire crumble, Phillips took a plea deal. 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and $500,000 in fines. Plus he had to pay back everything he'd stolen, which would take most of his assets. "It's not enough," Mom said when we heard. 2 years for what he did to us? She was right, it wasn't enough. But seeing him in handcuffs on the courthouse steps while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, that gave everyone some satisfaction. He tried to hide his face, but the photos were everywhere by evening. Kayla won a journalism award for her reporting. At the ceremony, she spent most of her speech talking about the workers' courage. "The real heroes of this story," she said, "are the men and women who risked everything to speak truth to power." She stayed in touch with Miriam, who'd become an unofficial spokesperson for immigrant workers' rights. "6 unions mean clear rules," he told me when I ran into him at the grocery store. "I'd rather negotiate with organized workers than deal with the mess Phillips left behind." The vote was 90% yes. "Workers, you have to do it," Mom said, gripping my hands. "Tell them everything. Make sure this never happens to anyone else." The day of the conference, I stood at the podium looking out at all those faces. Mom sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Miriam was there too, and Jorge, and even Louis. Miranda gave me a thumbs up from the side of the stage. "My mother worked 36 hours straight," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "She did it because a man with power convinced her she had no choice. But he was wrong. We always have a choice. Sometimes it just takes one person to remind us of that." I talked for 20 minutes about everything. The threats, the fear, the moment I decided to fight back, the community that rose up when given the chance. The room was dead silent except for occasional gasps when I described the worst parts. When I finished, the applause was deafening. But what mattered more was Mom's face. Proud, dignified, free. After the conference, things started changing in ways I never expected. The state labor board contacted me about creating a hotline specifically for immigrant workers. They wanted someone who understood both the fear and the language barriers, and they offered me a part-time position while I finished college. $20 an hour just to answer phones and help people? Mom said when I told her, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's more than I made at the factory after 15 years. The hotline launched 3. My boss has my passport," she said. "He says I owe him $5,000 for bringing me here, but I came on my own. Please, I don't know what to do." I spent an hour on the phone with her, explaining her rights, connecting her with Miranda's office, giving her the same courage someone should have given my mother years ago. When we hung up, she was still scared, but she had a plan. By of the month, I was getting 15 calls a day. Each one was different but the same. Workers trapped by fear, by language, by men like Phillips, who knew exactly how to exploit them. Jorge started bringing workers to the church meetings himself, driving the factory van on Wednesday nights. Louis didn't just allow it. He paid for the gas and gave people the time off. "It's good business," Louis told me when I thanked him. "Workers who know their rights fights don't get exploited by the next guy. They stay longer, work better, everyone wins. The meetings had gotten so big, we had to move from the basement to the main sanctuary. 60 people showed up the week before Christmas, bringing food and sharing stories that weren't about fear anymore, but about fighting back. Miriam had started her own group at a different church across town. She called me one night, excited. We had 40 people tonight, and 3 of them want to file complaints about their bosses. Can Miranda help them too? Miranda had to hire 2 more lawyers just to handle all the cases coming in. She told me our story had broken something open, made people realize they didn't have to suffer in silence. You started an avalanche, she said. Phillips was just the first rock to fall. Mom's new job was going well. She'd already gotten 1 raise, and her boss, Mrs. Chen, was teaching her computer skills during lunch breaks. Sometimes I'd find Mom at our kitchen table practicing typing, her tongue sticking out in concentration like a kid learning to write. Mrs. Chen says if I learn Excel, she'll promote me to office work, Mom told me one night. Can you imagine? Me, working in an office? I could imagine it. I could imagine everything now. Phillips' factory was different under Lewis, but some things couldn't be fixed. The building was old, the work was still hard, and the pay, while legal now, wasn't great. So when a new medical supply company opened 20 miles away with better wages and a free shuttle service, half the workers applied. Competition is good, Lewis said when I ran into him at the grocery store. He didn't seem upset about losing workers. Makes everyone treat people better. Should have happened years ago. The new company hired 30 workers from Phillips' old factory, including 3 women from Mom's church group. They carpooled together, singing along to the radio on their way to jobs that paid $3 more an hour with actual benefits. Jorge had become the unofficial union representative at the factory, elected by a landslide. He negotiated with Lewis every month, and they'd actually become friends in a weird way. I saw them having coffee together at the diner, going over worker concerns like normal people solving problems instead of enemies. Lewis isn't Phillips, Jorge told me. He actually listens. Last week, workers said the break room was too hot. You know what he did? Installed air conditioning. 6 months into his sentence, Phillips tried to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued the evidence was obtained illegally, that I'd trespassed, that the workers had been coached to lie. The appeal was denied in less than a week. The evidence is overwhelming, the judge wrote in her decision. I had Miranda read it to me over the phone, and we both cried when she got to the part that said, the defendant systematically terrorized vulnerable workers for profit. The courage of those who exposed him should be commended, not questioned. The local newspaper did a follow-up story for the 1-year anniversary. They interviewed Mom, who spoke in English for the first time publicly. Her accent was thick, but her words were clear. I was scared every day for 3 years, she told the reporter. Now I'm not scared. Now I help other people not be scared. That's better than money. The article included a photo of Mom at her desk at the new job, wearing professional clothes and smiling. She framed that picture and hung it next to my college acceptance letter on our living room wall. Kayla kept covering labor stories, but she always checked in with us. She was working on a documentary about immigrant workers' rights and wanted to include our story. You changed how I think about journalism, she told me over coffee. It's not just about exposing bad things. It's about giving people power to fight back. The documentary filmmaker followed Mom to work one day, filming her training new employees. She was patient and kind, switching between English and Spanish to make sure everyone understood. Her hands, once so swollen she couldn't bend her fingers, now moved confidently across keyboards and through paperwork. I never thought I'd be teaching anyone anything, Mom told the camera, but I know what it's like to be scared and confused, so I make sure nobody who works with me feels that way. I was down to 1 semester before graduation. My grades had suffered during the Phillips fight, but I'd recovered. My sociology professor asked me to write my thesis on our experience, saying it was exactly the kind of real-world application the department wanted to see. This isn't just academic, she said. This is how change actually happens. Writing the thesis meant going through everything again. The emails, the recordings, the court documents. It was harder than I expected, reliving those weeks of fear and anger, but it also showed me how far we'd come. The thesis defense was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Mom took the day off work to attend, wearing her best dress and sitting in the front row of the small conference room. When the professors asked me hard questions about systemic change and legal frameworks, I thought about all those workers still out there, still scared, and I found my answers. Individual action isn't enough, I said, but individual action can catalyze collective response. My mother was paralyzed by fear until someone she trusted, me, showed her she had power. How did Jorge go from watching silently for 5 years to becoming the person everyone trusts with their problems? The way he checks that complaint box every day and promises no cameras. I wonder what specific moment made him decide to change everything about. That's what we need. Trusted voices in communities telling people they have rights. The lead professor nodded. And how do we create those trusted voices? We're already creating them, I said. Every worker who sees justice served becomes a voice for the next one. Every Miriam who finds her courage helps 5 more find theirs. It's exponential. They approved my thesis with distinction. Mom cried and took about 50 photos of me with the approval letter. A week. It's an advisory position, they explained. We need someone who understands the ground level, not just the policy level. The first task force meeting was intimidating. Lawyers, professors, state officials, and me, a college student who just happened to record the right evidence at the right time. But when I started talking about the fear that keeps workers silent, everyone listened. We can pass all the laws we want, I said, but if workers don't know about them or are too scared to use them, they're worthless. We need education in communities, in languages people speak, from voices they trust. The task force approved funding for community education programs in 12 cities. Miriam would run one of them, teaching workers' rights in 3 languages at churches, community centers, and even in parking lots outside factories during shift changes. Phillips got out after serving 18 months, early release for good behavior. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of any factory or any of his former workers. Someone saw him working at a car dealership 40 miles away, selling used cars and looking older, deflated. He'd lost everything, his money, his properties, his power. Jorge texted me when he heard. He's just another nobody now. That's the best revenge. But I didn't care about revenge anymore. I cared about the woman who called the hotline that morning, crying because her boss had threatened to call ICE if she didn't work through her lunch breaks. I cared about getting her help, getting her justice, getting her free. The graduation ceremony was on a perfect May afternoon. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, and I could hear Mom screaming my name from the crowd. Not elegant cheering, full-on screaming like I'd just won the Olympics. Later, at the small party in our apartment, Mom gave a speech in English that she'd been practicing for weeks. My daughter is hero, she said, her accent thick but her voice strong. Not because she fight big man, because she teach me I am not small, I am not nothing, I am person who deserve respect. She teach everyone this. Miriam raised her glass of soda. To the person who reminded us we're human beings, not machines. Jorge added, to the one who showed us fear is a choice, not a life sentence. Even Lewis had come to the party. To the young woman who made me realize running a factory ethically isn't just possible, it's profitable. But the toast that mattered most came from Mom. Mija, she said, stopping me with a hand on my arm. You know what makes me most proud? Not that you saved me, that you saved yourself. You could have been quiet, been safe, but you chose to be brave. That's who you are. I hugged her. The next Monday, I started my new job at a nonprofit focused on immigrant worker rights. My office was small, just a desk and 2 chairs, but it had a window that looked out on the city. I could see the factory from there, the one where Mom had suffered, where Phillips had ruled through fear. It was still running, still employing hundreds of people, but it was different now. The workers had rights, voices, power. My first client walked in that Tuesday morning, a woman about Mom's age with the same exhausted eyes Mom used to have. She spoke in whispered Spanish about her employer withholding pay, about threats and fear and not knowing what to do. I leaned forward, speaking in Spanish, my voice steady and sure. You're safe here. Let me tell you about your rights. Let me tell you what we're going to do. Let me tell you how we're going to make this right. She started crying, not from fear but from relief. Someone was listening. Someone cared. Someone was going to fight for her. This was my job now. This was my life. Every day, I got to be the person I'd wished existed when Mom was suffering. Every day, I got to turn fear into power, silence into voice, victims into fighters. The woman across from me wiped her eyes and pulled out a crumpled pay stub. They say I owe them money for my uniform, but I already paid. They keep taking it from my check. I started taking notes, already thinking about which lawyer to call, which agency to contact, how to build the case. This was what I did now. This was who I was. Thanks for letting me wander along with you through all this. It's been really interesting sharing these moments together. Until next time, stay curious. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.